Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leaderfolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. Today, I'm joined by Dubs Weinblatt. They are the Associate Director of Education and Training in the New York metro area, where they work to better integrate LGBTQ inclusive policy, programming, culture, and leadership in Jewish institutions. They're also the founder and executive producer of Thank You for Coming Out, a queer improv show, and now a podcast, so go check it out. And co-founder and executive producer of Craft Your Truth, an organization that encourages LGBTQ folks to use any kind of performance art as a way to express their stories and connect with their community around them. I feel like maybe I'm giving too much away, but I promise this conversation is going to be awesome. Dubs also earned their BS from The Ohio State University. I'm also an Ohioan, so
Woo.
OH.
I know.
And Dubs currently volunteers with New Alternatives and is currently writing a book. You sound like an admirably busy person.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm so busy. I'm so tired.
Well, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. I'm so excited to get to talk with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So usually I start just by asking my guests to tell me a little bit about themselves and how they came to be doing the work that they're doing, how they came to be engaged in the Jewish community, like in the leadership role that they're currently occupying. So can you give us a little intro?
Yeah. How far back do you want me to go? I think it all kind of matters to start from the very beginning. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and always felt that I was different than other folks around me. Hindsight is I was struggling with my gender identity and sexual orientation. But at the moment, I didn't really quite have the language or the awareness to know about that. So as I was moving through life and really involved in my Jewish communities, I went to my JCC preschool and was in Sunday school and Hebrew school and had a bat mitzvah, was very active in BBYO in high school and then in Hillel in college. With each of those moments of my life, I felt an extreme disconnect with the Jewish community and with all the communities that I was a part of, because I didn't really see myself reflected within those communities. And so even though I deeply wanted to be so connected and part of those communities, there was a link missing, and I couldn't quite find myself a place that felt authentic. So when I was in college at the Ohio State University, and active in my Hillel, I came out as gay my sophomore year of college. And within my Hillel, there was a Jewish Queers and Allies group that I was able to participate in and made some friends, which was really lovely. And then when I graduated from undergrad, there were no other institutions that I could cling on to, if that makes sense. And so then there were no other kinds of organizations that I saw that were super queer friendly or queer friendly at all. And so I kind of made a decision to focus on my queer identities over my Jewish identities. And so fast forward to 29 years old, and I had an epiphany realizing that I'm a genderqueer trans person, and everything kind of fell into place for me. Not everything, but a lot of things in my life fell into place once I realized that about myself and had the language to talk about it. And then eventually I realized that there was still a piece missing. There was still something that felt off. And it came to me that it was my Jewish identity. And I missed that community that I longed for when I was younger and really wanted to find my place. And if there wasn't a place, I wanted to make it. So I had been following Keshet on social media for a while, but all of their jobs were located in Boston, and I was in New York City. And still am in New York City. But they actually ended up posting a job for New York or Boston. And I just knew that I had to have it. It had to be mine. And so I went on Facebook and I posted, do I know anyone who knows anyone? And I was able to, this kid, Josh, who I had known since preschool and I went through high school in BBYO with, knew someone at Keshet and connected us. And it was just so lovely. And this was November of 2016. And I actually was communicating with Josh the night of the election. And then the next day, which was like one of the darkest days in our country's history, I would gather to say, was like when he actually made the connection. And I was like, I hope that just because today's what it is, that, you know, this connection will stick. And it did. And I ended up getting the job at Keshet and started like the very beginning of January of 2017. And so I've been there, I guess it's been 3.5 years, and have, I guess that's like the very short, even though it was very long, version of how I got to be where I am. So now I spend all of my time, both at Keshet and with my projects outside of work, doing my best to create spaces and to create visibility within not only the Jewish community, but the community as a whole, for folks to see themselves reflected and know that they belong and that they're not alone.
That's incredible.
Thanks.
I love a good story about somebody ending up where they belong.
Yeah, it's nice.
So is the position that you originally applied to at Keshet the same position that you hold now?
No, that's a great question. When I started, I took a very junior associate role, as part-time working on the teen team and the teen department, and splitting my time between that and the education team, which at the time was only the director. And then from there, had a few different jobs. And then last year was when I landed in this particular job that I'm in now.
Gotcha. So now you're the Associate Director of Education and Training. And I'm curious to know, do you have a formal background or like pedagogy education in education itself? Or is that something that you've learned along the way?
Both. I was at Ohio State. I was a human development and family science major, because at the time when I went to Ohio State, you actually couldn't be an education major. Which I think the program has now since shifted for other reasons that we can talk about another time. But so I do have...
My sister just graduated from Ohio State last year. She was an education major.
Oh, okay. So she I don't know if she knows the history, but there actually was a lawsuit against Ohio State because of the way that the program was set up when I went. So I think it is definitely different now than it was then.
Wow. I'll have to ask her about it.
Yeah. And I can tell you offline too. But so I do have some background, and it's also something that I've learned along the way.
Gotcha. So what is the day-to-day of the work that you do? I would say now. I don't know if now for COVID or now for non-COVID times, but you can answer for either.
I'll talk about what it used to be, because that's what I really loved the most. And I love what I do now too. So day-to-day was very different. Part of my work, so my portfolio is specifically within the New York metro area. So I got to travel to the 5 boroughs, Westchester, Long Island, and meet with different leaders of Jewish institutions and talk about inclusion and facilitate trainings. So I really loved being on the ground and meeting new people and networking, and also facilitating the trainings that would then, start the conversation to make their spaces a place where anyone feels like they belong. And now, of course, it's different. I still get to facilitate trainings, but it's less of that networky piece that I really love. Also building resources and working on different training modules. And actually, because of COVID, I, along with my team, created this series called Joy and Resilience, where we interview different LGBTQ Jewish leaders about joy and resilience. So I've gotten to interview some very incredible folks through that project, which I'm really happy about.
That sounds so cool. So as you found your way back towards the Jewish community and you found yourself employed as a Jewish professional,
Mm-hmm.
can I ask how your personal relationship to Judaism evolved?
Yeah. It's a good question. I will say that it is something that I am actively still trying to figure out and struggling with. But I am determined to find my place in the Jewish community. I think being part of the Keshet community and seeing that it's possible to exist as both my fully queer self and fully Jewish self in the same space, it exists. And it's the best feeling in the world. And so, I'm not really answering your question.
No, I think that it's totally however you want to interpret it.
Okay. I mean, I think, and it's a little harder to find those beautiful spaces outside of the curated spaces that Keshet creates. And so I still struggle with finding my place. I had a really beautiful ceremony, a Hebrew name change ceremony that was led by my friend and mentor, Rabbi Becky Silverstein. And it was surrounded by a group of queer Jewish teens and some allies. And it was just so special to be able to participate in a Jewish ritual fully as myself and not hiding a piece of me. And I'm still actively searching for Jewish spaces where I can feel fully seen and not feel like I'm an afterthought or that I have to advocate for myself for basic dignity. So all of that is to say, I'm hopeful, and I'm also really still struggling to find my place.
Yeah. It sounds like the work that you're doing is really paving the way for people now, but also for people in the future will probably reap more benefits than the people who have been struggling through it now.
Yeah.
If that's a slightly inarticulate way to put it.
No, it's very articulate, and it's right. It's absolutely correct. And that's part of the motivation to keep doing the work, is to make, future generations feel less pain and feel more celebrated than I felt.
Yeah, that's so important. So when you go into these institutions, what kinds of orgs are you working with?
All kinds: synagogues and camps and JCCs and federations and youth groups, other kinds of Jewish group type places. So really any organization that's Jewish is fair game.
Gotcha. Okay, I selfishly am very excited to talk to you about your performing background, because
cool.
I come from a theater background. And so anytime I find another Jewish professional who's like a sleeper performer, well, not that you are, but that it's like another thing on their plate, I get so excited.
Awesome.
So for you, that is thank you for coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what's the story? How did it start? How does it manifest now?
Yeah, totally. So when I first moved to New York, I was doing improv as part of a theater in the city called the Magnet Theater. And they had an LGBT show called There's No Place Like Home, but it was mostly cis white men. And then every once in a while they'd invite someone else in, or a few people in. And then that show eventually folded. And it was Pride of 2015, and there was no show for Pride. And so I had never produced a show before, but I felt it important for there to be a queer space. So I asked if I could produce a show. And the theater was like, sure, how about Monday night at 10:30? And I was like, oh, that is probably the worst time that's ever existed, but sure, I'll take it. And so I needed a name, and I had also previously done stand-up. And one of my jokes is a joke around the premise of thanking people for coming out to see the show, and then me saying a silly joke that's like, no one ever thanked me when I came out. And so, so my best friend Dolce was like, why don't you name the show Thank You for Coming Out? And I was like, that's perfect. And so the premise of the show is a storyteller shares one of their coming out stories, and then a group of queer improvisers take the details from that story and bring it to life using improv and musical improv. It ended up selling out that Monday night at 10:30. And I was like, that's wild. Is that because it's Pride or what? So we tried it again in August and it was sold out again. So I was like, okay, I'm onto something. There's clearly a need for an all queer space to share our stories. So eventually, after a few years, there was so much demand that I expanded to a second theater and produced the show twice a month at 2 different theaters. And we started traveling a little bit to perform at festivals. And we performed at Ohio State's Hillel a few years ago, which was really special. And then last year, I was approached by the folks at Gay City News, and they were like, do you want to turn Thank You for Coming Out into a podcast? And I said yes, and I've never done this before. So they were like, we think you're going to do great. So I started hosting a podcast, and we're now in the middle of our second season. And it's been a really special joy. And the Thank You for Coming Out community is so special, and it's not just a show, right? It's like we all like support each other and show up for each other, and beautiful friendships have blossomed, and romantic relationships have blossomed, and business partnerships and all that good stuff. So it's been really, really magical to see how it's evolved over time.
Wow, that is incredibly beautiful and so exciting and moving to hear about it just gaining momentum and building this community.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really special. I feel happy that I'm part of it.
How has your experience been with your own podcast? How's that going?
It's awesome. I love it. I'm thankful for my improv background because it's really helped me listen and recall information. But I just love learning about other people and hearing their stories and hearing their dreams and what inspires them, and just having a real conversation about life and what it is like to be a queer person in the world right now, and finding commonalities among our stories, even if we hold different identities. It's just something that's really special to me that I've really, really enjoyed over the past year.
Yeah, I'm also fairly new to podcasting. Leaderfolk just started in April.
Wow.
And we've been going pretty much weekly since April, but it's exciting to get to talk to another podcaster because I sort of feel like I'm making things up as I go along a little bit.
So you're improvising.
Yes, that's definitely.
Yeah, I certainly do that too. I'm lucky. I have a producer who helps guide me a little bit here and there. More than here and there, a lot. But yeah, it's also nice to talk to a fellow podcaster. So it's a new medium that lots of people are now turning to, which I get because it's, accessible.
Totally. And I do need to shout out my producer, Lonnie Goldsmith. I don't know if he'll leave this in, but he is a gem and very helpful.
Thanks, Lonnie.
I don't want to discount that.
Leave it in, Lonnie.
So, in the intro that I gave about you, mm-hmm. I said that you're writing a book. Mm-hmm. What book are you writing?
I am writing a book is a really... I more so have like a lot of Google Docs that I'm putting ideas into, but I also have like an outline. I don't have like a publisher or anything, but I'm just writing the story of my life and what it's like, what it was like growing up, and what it's like being a genderqueer, trans, Jewish person in the world when essentially most of the structures in society are built against me. Of course, I have privileges in other ways. But yeah, so that's what the book's about.
That's awesome.
Potential book.
No, I think that's amazing to be able to sit down and try to organize your thoughts, and I'm 100% confident that it would be meaningful to other people, because I can tell just from talking to you that you have so much energy and inspiration to share.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, secret for the listeners, this is our second stab at this podcast, and the first time there were some tech issues, but just seeing Dubs on the Zoom screen and like watching you try to finagle all the tech, I was like, this is a person I'm really excited to talk about.
Oh, thanks.
to talk to, sorry.
I really wanted to make it work. So I'm glad that even despite the tech issues today, that we are here together.
Oh my gosh, me too. I'm going to move on to another one of your incredible initiatives, Craft Your Truth.
Yeah. Yes.
Craft
Your Truth. So I met my friend Jeff Kidwell. He did Thank You for Coming Out. It was June of 2016. And so it was right after the Pulse shootings. And we had never met, but he came and did the show, and then we became fast friends. And over a conversation that we had after that, we were like, there's so much in our little innocent minds 3 years ago. We're like, there's so much hate in the world. We need to like bring some more joy. And little did we know what we have in the world now. But anyways, I digress. So we were like, what could we do to just bring more joy to the world and to the queer community? And so we came up with Craft Your Truth. And so what we do is we partner with, so far we've partnered with New Alternatives, which is a nonprofit in New York City that works with LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. And so what we did was we brought in a bunch of teaching artists to work with the clients of New Alternatives on crafting their truth. So crafting whatever story they wanted to share in whatever way they wanted to share it. So a spoken word poem. Actually, Caroline Rothstein was our who I know has been on your podcast, is a dear friend of mine and an incredible educator and spoken word poet. And she's been our mentor in all of our iterations and is now one of our co-producers. And so we bring these teaching artists in, they craft spoken word and song or dance or rap or whatever is speaking to the clients. We have their teaching artists work with them. And then in the first iteration that we did, we actually had a showcase where people paid, bought tickets to come see the show, and the clients performed their pieces that they created that day. It's just like a day-long summit. They didn't have weeks and weeks to create. They just had a few hours, but then performed it to a crowd who bought tickets to see them, and they were floored and loved that people cared enough to come see them perform. And we're like, of course people care about you. And it was just a powerful moment to be a part of. And then the theater donated 100% of the ticket sales back to New Alternatives. It just was like a really special moment. So we did it one more time. And then 2019 somehow came and went, and we didn't do one. We had one planned for this year, June 1st. And of course that couldn't happen, but we are now actually doing a workshop for Transformation 2020, which is at the end of this month. It's hosted by the Center for Popular Democracy, and they're bringing together a bunch of different artists and community organizers as a way to merge art with activism and politics. So it's a really cool event that everyone should check out, transformation2020.org.
Great. And I'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So it seems like there's this kind of divide, and you can totally correct me if that's not the right word, between like the Jewish LGBTQ activism side of your work, and then the more kind of like creative or performance-based activism. And I'm just wondering, like, when you think long-term about your career or your goals or your impulses, like, do you dream of those things intersecting more?
I guess I
It's
don't
totally
know.
okay if the answer is no.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if the answer is no, or if it's more so I don't know, but probably leaning more towards no. And I think that's because, right, in this particular moment, I'm struggling extra hard with figuring out how I feel about Judaism. And so to think that I would be spending the rest of my life thinking about that feels big, but also things can change. And I'm also in like, my tech didn't work all day kind of mood. So, ask me next week and
Totally
see if it
fair. Totally fair.
But I do get to bring some of my, my other skills into my work at Keshet. So I, teach improv at our teen Shabbotanim, our weekend retreats way for our teens. The Joy and Resilience series, pulls from the skills of podcasting and interviewing, which is nice. So there definitely are ways to overlap. I just don't really know what it looks like long term.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't mean to put you on the spot
like that. No, it's absolutely fine. Listen, I'm an improviser. Put me on the spot.
So, when you go into the institutions where you're doing these trainings and you carry with you all these complicated feelings about the Jewish community and the ways that it hasn't been a comfortable or safe space for you consistently throughout your life, how do you navigate that?
That is such a good question, and that is such an important question that I think about all day, every day. I like to think of myself as a storyteller. And when I'm teaching, I weave parts of my story and parts of my experience into what I'm teaching. And for me, that feels healing. And for me, that feels like an important use of my story and my hurt, because it helps to educate and it helps to propel the change that I want to see forward. So it's not always easy. It can feel really hard sometimes, especially when there are some folks who don't quite understand what I'm teaching or don't quite want to understand what I'm teaching or ask very invasive or hurtful questions. It's hard to stay present. I'm always maintaining professionalism, but sometimes it can feel really tough to navigate. And so it's finding the balance of, what do I want to share? What feels safe? In some spaces I won't share certain things. In some spaces I will. And really just trying to learn, really trying to learn how to listen to my body and to listen to a room and know what the right thing is to say in that moment. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. And sometimes I get hurt more and sometimes I don't. So it really it's like a dance, really.
Yeah. What do you hope would be more standard baseline knowledge for all Jewish organizations that would allow you and other people from the LGBTQ communities or communities of color who have been marginalized in these Jewish institutions? Like, what do you wish these institutions knew when they were embarking on these trainings?
Wow. A lot. Everything. But I think one of the biggest pieces that I think would help any marginalized community would be to not make assumptions about a person based on anything, because there's no way to know someone's gender identity or sexual orientation or their pronouns just by looking at them or hearing them. People ask LGBTQ people who may not dress or have have a gender expression that they understand if they belong here. In a space, or what are you doing here, or make assumptions about them in a space. And I know that happens to Jews of color all the time as well. And so I think if we took the assumption out of why someone's in a space and instead embraced them and welcomed them, I think that would be a huge, huge improvement than what it is now, because spaces would have to be more intentional, and that's just helpful for everybody. And I think the other thing as it pertains to the LGBTQ community is that identity is fluid and identity shifts over time, and identity can change, especially depending on safety of a space, and to really create a space that embraces any kind of change or shift when it comes to someone's identity. I think those would be my biggest takeaways at the moment.
Yeah, those are great. It seems so basic, and unfortunately is still such a difficult bar for some people to climb over.
Yep.
So I'm going to let you go soon, but as a fellow podcaster and just to kind of put you less on the spot, maybe, is there anything else that you wish that I had asked or that is just on your mind that you'd love to share about?
I think the only thing that's on my mind is I'm currently being followed for a documentary. The documentary is called To Life, and it's the next generation of Jews are finding their voice. And so essentially following me, a trans Jew, a Jew of color, an Orthodox woman, I believe who's in France, who's becoming a rabbi, and another person who it's escaping me at the moment. So it's just, getting a sense of all the different ways that you can be Jewish. And so it's actually part of the reason why I've been, I think, struggling more so with Judaism than usual, because I've been having a lot of conversations about it and being asked a lot of questions that I haven't normally been thinking about, haven't really been on the forefront of my mind. And so it's like, what's more Jewish than asking questions and struggling? So
Too true.
Yeah. So, but it's been really cool, getting to know Ari, who's the director, and it's also a really weird sensation to have cameras up in your business a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, are they coming to your home? Are they following you at work? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, they've been coming over. So I started hormone replacement therapy a few months ago, and so they've been coming over. Oh, thank you. They've been coming over to film me taking my shot every week, and I had an award ceremony thing that I was going to a few weeks ago, and they came and filmed me getting ready for that, and so they're around a lot enough. If I were doing more travel-y stuff for work, they would be following me doing that, but no one really wants to watch people on Zoom. So it's less that and more the other stuff. They came to, I went to a Black Trans Lives Matter march, and they came to that with me, that kind of stuff. It's been a really neat experience so far.
Yeah, that sounds amazing and kind of surreal. Was that in process before COVID hit?
It was. They had more footage. So it was, but they hadn't started filming me until... So I came in right at the wrong time. So there's like a sizzler reel, I think, or a sizzle reel. I don't know what it's called. A sizzle reel, I think. And I'm the only one whose footage is Zoom. And so I think they're updating it because now they have some in-person stuff. So yeah, it was in the very beginning when COVID hit.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you.
And probably very vulnerable.
It's so vulnerable. And because sometimes I forget that I'm being filmed, or that anything that I say is like fair game for this documentary that will potentially be seen by millions of people, because they, when any documentary is made, they want big networks to pick it up. So there is that possibility that could happen, and just kind of bracing myself for if that ever happens, what that would feel like.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad I asked because I had no idea that you were working on that. And
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thanks. I'm glad you asked too.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a Jewish thing. It can be anything you want. Like, what is just making you happy these days? It could be a TV show or art or food.
Oh, food is so good. What is making me happy these days? Such a hard question. I just finished watching The Mindy Project, and that show makes me very happy.
I have to get on that train, I think.
Yeah, it's really good. It's not without its problems, as most shows are, especially when they're not current, but it is, for the most part, just I cackle out loud, laugh multiple times every episode, which is just so good for the soul.
So good. Okay. Thank you for that. I love that.
Yes, of course. What's making you happy these days?
Ooh. I made babka for the very first time last week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a full day process, but the recipe made 2 gigantic babkas.
Nice.
I think that's my answer.
Amazing. And you get to eat the thing that's making you happy too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just delicious, and it's not very technical. Like, it just takes a long time, but it isn't that difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But it still felt like a really lovely little accomplishment to have those babkas sitting on my counter at the end.
Amazing. Mazel tov.
Oh, thank you. We'll take the little wins where we can get them these days.
100%.
Well, Dubs, thank you so much for being here today. I've really loved getting to talk with you, and I hope that we stay in touch and that I can be of service in helping connect people to the work that you do. So just thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity for me to share, and right back at you. If I can do anything to help support your podcast, please tap me. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye. Leaderfolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. Leaderfolk is a project of Jewfolk Inc. and the Jewfolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.